Hey, what's going on, gamers? SD here, and welcome back to a little more Dear Esther, the Landmark Edition. This is the developer's commentary, so we're going to continue on. As I stated before, we'll walk through the game. I'll let the developer's commentary take over. Since I've already played and beat the game, quote unquote beat, um, I will add my comments in as to my experiences and what I think pertaining to what the developers might have to say. So with that said, let's check it out.
The caves in the game are really interesting because it's a very tonal shift within the whole visual look of the game. It's kind of like this more organic, more surreal, dreamlike landscape compared to what you're used to before this point. It's we kind of used the visuals and this kind of unreal theme very subtly, but here it's kind of at the forefront, and it's, to me, has kind of been designed as this kind of journey through the inner self, through the body, and it's really designed to be a very different experience compared to the rest of the game.
And I would have to agree with that. When I played the caves in Chapter 3, it was quite an experience. I was blown away by the sound, by the graphics. It was so different from what I had experienced thus far.
This, for me, is probably the most pivotal music cue in the game, and it's the one that most people write to me about to say that they are absolutely obsessed with and they love. It's the only music cue that has singing. It has a female voice, and I think that's a really important shift for me, that you've gone from this beautiful string music, but it's quite abstract, into what is effectively a song. And with lyrics, so you're actually explicitly saying something as a composer at this point. The other thing that I think it's important to say for me is it's the biggest shift from the music that I wrote for the mod. It's the same music, but the act of having it sung by an amazing singer. I sang it on the original and it's really bad, and Clara Sanabras re-recorded it. And it's what good actors do, it's what Nigel Carrington did, it's what good musicians do, and they take something that you've created and they just shove it up into the next level and make something that's good into something really extraordinary. And also for me, I think it's a point where the environment art and the music just meld so beautifully and so seamlessly into one. I mean, on a personal level, I've played the game hundreds of times now, and I still enter the caves and I look at Rob's work and I'm just absolutely overawed, just gobsmacked by its beauty. And I just think it's a really magical moment in gaming for me, actually. I know that probably sounds really dramatic, but I just think it absolutely hits something where everything just works together. And the music is so dreamlike. You know, Rob has talked about the journey through the body, and I think that's absolutely, for me, the music becomes so organic and fluid and actually very feminine and female at that point. You're hearing the voice of his love.
I just want to say that I think you can divide caves in games into pre and post Dear Esther. I think that it's just a way of breaking away from reality into saying what you can do with these spaces that actually makes them this incredibly, much more vividly colourful and much more kind of interpretative and look for it. And it's really interesting that I look at caves now in games and I find myself going, that's a very Rob Briscoe cave. And I think that's an amazing thing to have achieved. So I think it's one of those it's great paying other people's work compliments. I enjoy that because you never feel like you're being big-headed about yourself. But I think it is. I think particularly it does come again down to that blend between the audio and visuals that just it's a real high watermark. I kind of it's one of the areas in all of the games we've made that I'm most proud of.
I think as well, you think you know what you're getting with Dear
Yes.
Esther for the first 45 minutes of the game, wherever we are at this point, and then you step into something completely unexpected and completely new, and I think it just throws the player such a curveball in such a wonderful way.
Yeah, this is probably one of the areas that really stood out for me in the cave. It's just absolutely stunning. I remember the first time that I came up from the water, and at first I thought, well, am I supposed to jump off here? Will I die? And then after I jumped off to the water and then I noticed I was able to survive, I searched around looking for clues at the bottom of the water down here. And then I remember coming out of the water and then looking up at this blue hue in the cave, and then water coming down from the wall, and just the lighting and how it just transforms the cave. And then as you're walking through the music and that eerie sound, and even now it still gives me chills on my skin.
I think when you're designing a game, it's very easy to get very locked into what the system can do. And you're trying to deal with all the different variations of things that if a player does this, then this. And we have to deal with the consequence here. And our lead designer, Andrew, and I talk about this all the time about you might have an idea, but then how does this radiate out throughout the entire system? And you get very caught in the idea of what the system has to be and how robust the system has to be and this kind of thing. And I think what's really important as a sort of a designer, as a creative, is that understanding that actually the real game is happening in the player's head, and that the system can be whatever you want it to be, but if the game isn't running in the player's head as opposed to on the screen, then you're missing a trick. You're not letting the game be everything it could be. And I think the great thing about working with a game as simple as Esther in a way is that those sort of consequences of player interaction, there's not a huge number of them in the way that there might be with a very mechanically complex game. So you can really heavily focus on what is the game experience that's being played out within the player's sort of mind and heart at the moment. And there are other, sort of, I know this is a kind of a way of approaching game design that has become increasingly popular over the last few years, and that Journey was a really, really good example of that game company really focusing on what's the emotional experience of playing this game. But I think, again, it's probably one of the reasons why Esther has lasted as long as it has done, because it's not a mechanical exercise, it's an exercise in trying to inspire you as a player to have the deepest experience and the deepest engagement, and to really run the game in your own head rather than being something that you're sitting 6 feet away from kind of interacting with. I hate interaction as a term for that. I think it becomes very cold and mechanical and systems driven, and really interaction is completely trivial and pointless if there isn't an emotional engagement with the player and you haven't moved it away from the screen and into the player's head.
And I have to totally agree with his statement, because that's what this game does for you. It gives you that emotional pull, that emotional draw, investment into the game. It gives you that sense of feeling that something is happening around you, but you just don't know quite what it is. And so it pulls you in deeper and pulls you in deeper as you go through the game, trying to figure out what is this mystery, what's going on. And so they take all of these elements of running water and music and rocks falling and all the different little sounds and sights in the game to create a certain mood. And then as a player, when you're experiencing that, it's like predicated on what you see and how you feel about those certain things creates a certain mood for you.
What's really important to me is that Dear Esther started out as a Half-Life 2 mod, and if the Half-Life 2 modding community hadn't championed it and celebrated it and downloaded it a lot and talked about it and loved it, then it would never have been a game. So it's never really bothered me, the kind of is it a game conversation, because as far as I can see it, Dear Esther and like everything that's come after it has been inspired by it. This was championed by Half-Life 2 modders, and they made it what it is. And so if you've made something that the real kind of hardcore of the hardcore in terms of these are first-person shooter modders have gone, this is really good and really special and we're behind this, then you've already got the support of a really amazing gaming community, and the fact that they championed it, we owe them a huge amount in terms of where we are. And I'm really proud to come out of that scene. I'm really proud to be a company and to be sitting here talking about a game that started life as a mod.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that have really kind of like pushed us forward and given us the passion to be able to take it to a commercial level and give us the confidence to make us believe that there's an audience for this kind of thing.
Dear Esther was my first foray into writing music for games, and I actually approached it very traditionally, so more as a film score than a traditional interactive game music score. And what's really interesting for me is that the lack of interactivity in the music was never a problem for anybody that played the game. And that's a separate discussion, but there's a big schism between game music composers of how much the music should be following the player at all times in terms of interactive music. But one of the reasons I wanted to say something at this point was that this was my little first journey into thinking about how you write music for games rather than films. So I had this song that was a certain length, and Dan said, well, we don't know how long the player is going to take to traverse through that space. And I thought, oh no, he's right, and slightly panicked. So this was a very simple solution where the song was split in half, and then I wrote some drone music that could just play for as long as was needed as the player walked through the space, and then the second half of the song would seamlessly play. And it's very, very simple, but it's quite emblematic for me in terms of my career, because it was the first time that I had to think about the player. Because with film music, it's so simple. You know exactly what's going to happen when. But this concept of interactivity was so new for me. So I kind of looked back at it fondly because it's quite a basic approach to, compared to something like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, where that was an open world adventure where I had to really think about the player and their movement through the space. So I kind of look on this very fondly, this moment in the game.
It's interesting, when I played this game, this is another area that was really cool for me, just coming out of that small cavern into this large cavern, and it split off into several different paths, and I wasn't sure which way to take. And of course I went to the left and went over the bridge, and I didn't really fully explore the cave because I thought I would have the opportunity to come back. So that's what we're kind of doing now. It's given me another opportunity, and it's really interesting because not too many games give me what I'm feeling right now. As I walk through the water, there's this resistance, and as you can see, when I let go of the controller, it actually pushes you away. I mean, yes, there are games out there that do this, but I think this is really cool. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk around the area and see what all there is to see, because I didn't get that opportunity. Yeah, the music in this area is probably some of my favorite in the game. It's just that subtleness of, it almost feels like death to me. This impeding doom. I believe we
I
went
don't know
that
when
way.
the paper origami boats first came into things with Esther, really, but it felt like a really amazing metaphor of taking these letters and folding them into boats and then letting them leave the island, because you know at this point in the game, it's kind of the realization is there that this isn't going to end well, and that the narrator is never leaving the island, and the idea that this kind of, again, the idea of communication, or the attempt or failing communication, or trying to speak through the coma, or whatever it is, however you want to interpret it. But the idea of putting the boat in the underground river really felt like it kind of reinforced that sort of dream-like kind of quality of the caves, of actually there's something really sad about this one boat, because when you see it go past, you know that even the boats aren't going to leave the island. Like, this is something which doesn't have a tidy, neat kind of like resolution, and there's, even if you don't sort of think about it to that sort of level of depth, there's just something, it's one of those things that I really love about games that you can do, where it's just a moment that has a really distinct emotional tone to it, that you go, there's a pause when you see that boat goes past, that I just think is, yeah, it's something special you can do with kind of media like games.
And maybe I haven't experienced it yet. See, that looks like a guy maybe that's fishing or taking a piss. I'm not really sure, but I don't know what boat they're talking about unless I missed it. I'm just not really sure, because I didn't see that. Oh, look, there's the boat right there. So apparently I must have missed that as we entered the area. I'll have to go back and look. So that would be, they're actually they're a collection of boats if you look. That's quite interesting. Hopefully I can get out of this area now. It's the water's the pressure's, there we go. I was gonna say the pressure was pretty strong. I think the one thing I would like to do is go back across the river here, the stream, and then just go on the other side. I feel like the developers made this pathway for a reason. Maybe it was just to explore, maybe it was just to look. I'm not really sure, but I mean, it's pretty clear there's the pathway here. Yeah, I really wish I understood some of these signs that are on the wall. And it does look like a circuit board. I believe physics, you had pointed that out.
In a lot of ways, the caves were the hardest area of the game to actually write because we knew we didn't want to have much voiceover in there. I think because of the strength of the music, and this goes right back to the original mod, we wanted that to be the voice and for it to be a chance for Esther to speak rather than the narrator. And we also wanted to have this break so when the narrator came out from the caves, you had a real definite sense of something happening and that he had changed as a result of this journey. So it meant really felt wrong to have a lot of voiceover within there, but then that made it really difficult because then it was, you had like 4 one-sentence lines in there and each one of those had to have an absolute clarity and to really kind of work. So I think for me, it was really interesting. It's like the difference between writing kind of fiction and writing poetry. When you read really amazing poets and you have that incredible surgical precision where every single word is considered and placed so absolutely. And rather than being able to kind of, because the narrator rambles quite naturally, it was able to, you could kind of get into the flow of the narrator's ramble in other places in the level, and this was a real challenge because suddenly I was having to write like a poet of going, every single one of these words, every single cadence, every single sound has to be absolutely perfect, or it'll just feel like the narrator's voice is intruding on the rest of the experience. So it was, yeah, I think definitely the most challenging area of the game as a writer.
Sorry about that. We're going to have to replay that again. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but my controller, for whatever reason during that time, decided it wanted to disconnect, and in doing so, it just kind of spun me off the side of the cliff, which is so weird and random. And I was thinking for a second, okay, is this supposed to happen? Did they do this on purpose? No, they didn't, but that would have been a cool gimmick. So let's listen to it again so we can hear exactly everything he has to say. Now, if my controller goes out this time, I'm gonna question, you know, hey, well, what's going on here?
In a lot of ways, the caves were the hardest area of the game to actually write because we knew we didn't want to have much voiceover in there. I think because of the strength of the music, and this goes right back to the original mod, we wanted that to be the voice and for it to be a chance for Esther to speak rather than the narrator. And we also wanted to have this break so when the narrator came out from the caves, you had a real definite sense of something happening and that he had changed as a result of this journey. So it meant it really felt wrong to have a lot of voiceover within there, but then that made it really difficult because then it was, you had like 4 one-sentence lines in there and each one of those had to have an absolute clarity and to really kind of work. So I think for me, it was really interesting. It's like the difference between writing kind of fiction and writing poetry. When you read really amazing poets and you have that incredible surgical precision where every single word is considered and placed so absolutely. And rather than being able to kind of, because the narrator rambles quite naturally, it was able to, you could kind of get into the flow of the narrator's ramble in other places in the level, and this was a real challenge because suddenly I was having to write like a poet of going, every single one of these words, every single cadence, every single sound has to be absolutely perfect, or it'll just feel like the narrator's voice is intruding on the rest of the experience. So it was, yeah, I think definitely the most challenging area of the game as a writer.
The sound here is a classic case of, again, what music I think does really well, which is you've had this soft, lyrical, beautiful, epic, dreamlike music, and then the moment you come out of the caves, you're into this really harsh soundscape, and the tonal shift is very brutal, I think, and deliberately so. You have very little music when you come out of the caves. You hear the wind, and it's a classic case of foreshadowing. So we know from this point that things are probably going to get bleaker, more difficult. And yeah, it's something that music does really well, I think, which is that emotional signalling and signposting.
So, as I'm standing here, and it was interesting because I'm like, you know, why? I really half expected that the developers put something at the bottom of this pool of water, but unfortunately there's not. But as I'm standing here and I'm looking up at this long hole that goes to the surface, or what appears to go obviously to the surface, I can't help but wonder if this is that deep, deep hole that the developers were talking about right after, if you recall in the previous chapter, after you pass by the cargo ship and you start walking around down through that cavernous area. They said they put in this hole into the ground, and they put it there basically to kind of give the player the opportunity to jump off, but they didn't want to create death. So I believe that this is that hole, even though we never reach the bottom. It resets you. So you have to wonder about these candles as well. Why are these candles lit? How long have they been lit? Who lit them?
This whole area moved, didn't it? The original mod, this was a cave right at the beginning of the caves where everything was written, and it moved to the back end of the level, and we have this long corridor that's full of these kind of it's the point of high madness, I think, in the game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of just where you feel like you're losing the plot completely, both like visually and auditory, and you know, it's kind of like this really frenetic moment for me.
I think it's where you feel most that you're underneath a mountain, and you feel the weight of that mountain, and just I loved the idea when we were, you know, putting through it of what would it actually take to do this, like to actually paint all these symbols and what is going on. And it really is quite an explicit kind of thing of madness, of going, you would have to be insane or very, very disturbed to actually do this, and what is the process that this person's trying to work through, what they trying to achieve by this. And I think it really strengthened it, making it a crawl through a tunnel as opposed to just a static location.
Yeah, I think it's the consistency and the coherence of the symbols is a lot more broken down as well. Like you see some symbols before like scattered around the environments, but at this point they're like right in your face, and they're kind of just, it's just total madness, you know. Any kind of meanings have been crossed over and confused, and you know, I think it really helps to bring the tension up at this point at a level as well. So you're kind of coming out of this dreamlike state a little bit.
Yeah, you kind of know that you're getting towards the end of the serenity into something that's a bit more disturbed than that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've did all of the developers' commentary for the caves. I believe if I jump off in this hole, this will end chapter 3, and thus we will begin chapter 4. So before I do that, just want to say thank you for everybody that's watched the videos. Thank you if you've watched them again and you wanted to hear what the developers had to say, and please feel free to leave some comments below on the channel. I'd like to know what your thoughts are, and if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. And I will catch you guys on chapter 4. You guys, peace out.